Hello and welcome guys to my video on PS1 emulation featuring DuckStation. I have experience with EPSXE and PGXXP, I believe so. Those particular emulators I've played for so many years. And I can say they're great emulators and stuff like that. But there's one particular thing about DuckStation that makes it so special. And I'm about to show you in this quick tutorial or this guide on downloading DuckStation, a PS1 emulator for PC and Android. Now, let's get started by showing you guys the website. Now, the website, what you're going to do is, I'm going to link this in the description of this video. And what you're going to do is you're going to scroll all the way down and obviously you're going to download the zip. Now, because I already have a folder and stuff, I'd recommend that you name it DuckStation because that's exactly what I have it. I named it DuckStation, and obviously it has the regular settings, which is database, uh, input files, Qt plugins, resource shaders, translations, and it even has in the document folder uh, the mem cards, cheats, and etc. The BIOS as well too, which is very important. And if you guys don't have BIOS or you don't know where to find BIOS, I'll link it in the description as well. So basically, to get started, as you can see, the display that I have on right now is pretty much um, where you would rescan your games or add PS1 Games folder to your DuckStation emulator. Now, I would recommend if you do keep your games in a particular folder that I suggest you go here to the settings and scan for new games. Obviously, I would show you all the settings one by one, but basically when you do that and you scan for games, it shows up here uh, as so. What I would honestly say and what I would honestly recommend is the when you see the stars like this is the compatibility stars. Basically, what that means is some games will work, but because the compatibility stars are so low, it might not respond or it might mess up while you're playing the game. And what I recommend is that when I show you these settings, I'll go through which games actually are compatible, or the games that I just have on my list that are compatible with the settings I have, and some that are not. But let's get started. So we're gonna go one by one, and basically general settings, the start of it all. I would recommend just keeping it at the settings, whether you are experienced with emulators or you're just new to particular emulators. I would recommend keeping it at this particular settings. As to why, because of the fact that you may not know as much about emulation and how it really works, and I would just recommend just keeping the default settings. Obviously, you have pause on start full screen, which is not necessary because you can click right here. So, and when the game starts up, you can click at the full screen. Enable Discord presence is completely unnecessary because obviously uh, Discord already has a function to game activity, render to main video, such and such. So I would recommend keeping it at those particular settings. Miscellaneous, the controller backend, I would keep it at SDL. You can put it as an input depending on what controller you're obviously using, but we'll get to that. The emulator updates automatically as soon as you're about to click on it, which I would recommend that if you do happen to download the emulator and you do as I explained, which is make the DuckStation folder, drag the DuckStation release into the actual DuckStation folder, and unzip it, delete it. What you're going to do is you're going to click Qt and then Qt times 64 release, and then this is going to pop up. So that's that. It automatically updates the BIOS. So as I explained before, the BIOS are in the document section. If you don't have BIOS, you can either open it in Explorer or you can pretty much search it up, or I can give you the link to the BIOS in my video description. So basically, the BIOS is very self-explanatory. I recommend leaving it at default. But for people who are new um, to this video or new to emulation, I would recommend keeping it at default, which is auto detect, because it needs to auto detect it based on the BIOS in the documents folder, DuckStation folder. Um, so and the console settings. So basically, this plays a big part when you're trying to run the compatibility games. As I said before, with games like this that have low compatibility or just have no star compatibility, what you're gonna do is you're gonna take off the enable clock speed. What the clock speed does is it kind of renders the game in higher than 30 FPS, depending on what games you're actually playing. I would only recommend this if you see that the compatibility list is high or there's certain games that have 60 FPS codes in which it forces the environment and the character or the car of the game, just everything in general to be put at 60 FPS. My recommended settings is literally 260. I would not go anywhere higher than that. It also depends on what graphics card you really have. So, I mean, it's not like DuckStation or any PS1 emulator takes up that much GPU anyways. So, I would recommend that. The read up speed, um, I honestly think that the read up speed all depends on whether you want the game to load fast enough or not, but I would just leave it at default. Um, and then the multi-tap, very self-explanatory. If you have controller ports or you want your friend to play with you in games like Fighting Force, Army Men, stuff like that, you would enable that and then put enable on 2 ports only, or enable 1 and 2. Emulation settings. So this is kind of like an iffy one because the emulation speed already moves fast enough as it is. Unless you're on LSD or on something, I don't know if you like things to be in fast pace. Maybe you're part of this fucking Matrix world or something. But I would recommend keeping it at default, because it's obvious that if you upscale it past 100% and try to do 120 or 180, the game will move incredibly fast. It'll also matter if you turn off the enable clock speed, which is the overclocking. But even then, the game will still run fast. So I recommend leaving this at default. Fast forward speed and turbo speed, leaving it at unlimited. Host refresh rate, you could either enable or disable it, but that's just my particular settings. Leave the enable rewinding the way it is. It doesn't really need to be uh, changed in any way, but that's just me. Um, Game list settings. Now, as I explained before, if you have a folder with PS1 games, or if you don't, create a PS1 games folder with your games in there, choose the directory to add, and then just click on the PS1 games or wherever it is, your hard drive, your main hard drive, whatever it is. Scan for new games, and then it will pop up like so, where all the games are. Um, Hotkey settings. This all really depends on, I guess, what you would find important. Because some people have hotkeys to certain things that they feel that would be kind of necessary, but they're really not that necessary. I would recommend for um, new people that are actually trying to get um, the best out of the emulation for the save states to keep it at F1, F2, F3, F4, because maybe sometimes you don't feel like saving it in game and then you want to just save the state. So I would recommend keeping it at that because that's what I have it at. And then if you want the volume to be up or the volume to be down, set the key bindings. But this is just the all personal preference field. Um, Controller settings very self-explanatory. Um, if you have an Xbox One controller, PS4 controller, 8-bit controller, whatever type of controller you honestly have, you would obviously keep it a digital controller. If you want to use the analog stick, you could use that. It's completely up to you. And you would just set the key bindings, save the profile. You can name it whatever profile, so it makes it a lot easier for you. So when you actually are switching controllers, you can load the profile and it'll automatically load your key bindings or your button bindings to that particular controller or that specific controller. Memory card settings. Um, you will obviously leave this at default. I personally put my Gran Turismo save file in the second memory card because I wanted to save to the first. That's another thing I was going to actually explain. If you wanted to be able to grab a MCR file and you feel like it wasn't going to work for memory card 1, what you would honestly do is you should browse because it will probably be in the download section and you should browse, take the file and put it on the second memory card, load it from the second memory card so you can save it to the first one to make it a lot easier for you. Hopefully, if it makes it a lot easier for you. But I would just recommend leaving that at default. The display settings. Now, I've seen and I've worked with OpenGL as a rendering for certain emulators, whether it's PS1 emulator, PSP, but specifically the PS1 emulators. It's great. The games run smooth, but I personally would rather prefer D3, D11 because um, it allows me to use my graphics card and I get the most out of my games with my optimized settings. Um, Now, I'm not saying that it's anywhere close or probably better than OpenGL because they both run smooth. But I'm saying this because of the fact that if you have a great graphics card, like a 1070, 1080, stuff like that, ideally you would want to use your graphics card. So obviously, I have it at 1070, 16 by 9 because of my monitor. VSync, um, I would I would take it off if I was you. If you have like a lower graphics card or whatever, but if you want to turn it on, it's fine. It just makes the game run a bit smoother. Um, Threaded rendering, threaded presentation. I left that on because I don't see too much tear when it comes to certain games. When I left that off, I started to see some tear or some white lines on my screen. I don't know if it's just that, but I turned that option on and it resolved the issue. Aspect ratio 21 by 9, but I'd recommend newcomers to leave it by 16 by 9. Only overscan area. Basically, it cuts certain borders whenever you play certain games. So I would recommend keeping it at only overscan area. Adaptive preserve 3D to smooth 2D. So basically, what this does is, and what I've noticed is, when I play games like Bloody Roar, when I play games like Dino Crisis, when I play games like Resident Evil, it just gives a smoothness to the characters to make their faces look a little bit more glossier and unblocky. It removes that blockiness. So it just makes the characters look like their faces and environment are rendering at 60 FPS. Uh, so stretch to fill, obviously, to stretch to fill the screen, um, and basically to try to fill in the window. I left linear upscaling on because it obviously gives a bit of texture filtering, which is very important for most games. And then I just left most of the other options off. But this is my recommended settings for people who actually have the same graphics card or not. Um, Rendering enhancement settings. Now, this is the part where I know I speak about graphics cards, but it's very important to notice because um, the eternal resolution and the multi-sample, if you have a 1070 graphics card, this is gonna work great for you because as I explained before, DuckStation or any PS1 emulator doesn't take up that much GPU, but running at this particular setting is gonna make the game look crisp, especially if you have 60 FPS codes, of course. But um, I left it at 9x for 4K. If you feel like your emulator is having trouble, just bump it down to at least 8 times or 6 times because it still looks great. 8 times MSAA, which obviously works great. It works phenomenal actually. Um, I don't think there's a fair difference between MSAA and SSAA. But I know for a fact that like if you try to run it by 16 times, it just won't work. It will render it back to 8 times. Bilinear no edge blending. It just smooths out the games and and magnifies the textures to make it look a little bit more 3D, and it takes away the blockiness. The true color rendering, it forces the precision of color output to the console's frame buffer, um, making the frame rate for the game look a little bit smoother, look more texture and everything. The widescreen hack and Force NTSC and Force 4 times by 3, I would leave those off because I really don't notice a difference at all. In fact, it just makes it to where my game doesn't really respond. I don't know if it's just might be the emulator, it might be all the settings I have on, but I'd recommend keeping those off. And obviously, if you worked with PGXP, um, these particular settings that I have on just make some of my games, especially mostly the racing games, look flawless. I know there's not much you can expect out of a PS1 racing game, but it just makes the whole environment and the game look great. And I know I speak about the environment a lot, but it's very important because I'm the type of guy that I like to see um 60 FPS work universally. And I like to see the whole environment and the car and everything move at 60 FPS, and just the texture and just less blockiness, less borders, everything. So I would recommend keeping these settings on. Post processing, I would only work around this if you're experienced with shaders. If you don't have shaders, just ignore this. Um, Audio settings, I would leave this at default. Although I will say, just a good warning, if you do start up DuckStation, I recommend lowering the volume by going to volume mixer and turning it down to at least 36%, because it's really fucking loud. Or you could go to the settings and turn this down, but I'd also recommend doing both. Keep the settings as it is. The achievement settings is the most unique thing about DuckStation. Now, as I explained before, there are a couple of good things about DuckStation that makes it great, and this is one of them. Obviously, if you're an achievement person, they actually have a website to where you can get achievements from the certain games you actually play, or pretty much all of them. So if you log on to that particular website, you sign in or you sign up for it, you can basically have achievements for your games. I think it's kind of a cool feature. I personally don't use it because uh, I kind of like just playing my games the way it is. But that's just up to you. Now, the advanced settings, the last settings, right? So, if you're experienced with PS1 emulators in general, um, you should know exactly what to do with the tweaks and hacks in the advanced settings. But for those who are new and they don't know too much about DuckStation, or they don't know too much about PS1 emulators on PC, I'd recommend leaving this at default, because you never know what could happen if you turn certain things on. You're not too sure, and even if you read it, you're probably still not too sure, and then it winds up messing up the emulator to where it doesn't respond even if you close it and open it up again. Because I've had certain times where I've turned on certain settings in the advanced settings and it doesn't respond, and then all of a sudden I have to restart my PC. So that's just about it. Um, so yeah, that's about that. Now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna start up a game so I can show you, for example, what I mean by smoothness. And the game running at 60 FPS. As I said before, this thing is completely loud, so I'm obviously gonna lower it to at least 39. Um, so basically, long story short, the cheat settings. Now, I was thinking about putting this in another video, but I'm just gonna explain it, how it really works. So basically, if you're familiar with using cheats in the past emulators, it should be relatively easy to use it in this particular emulator. So one of the cheats that I obviously use, right, is the 60 FPS GT2 code. And it all depends on what websites, because there's some codes that are 60 FPS that work for certain games, and there's some that are not. The cheat codes, it all depend on the website that you go to. But if you don't know how to add the cheats, basically what you do is you add a new cheat, and you basically put the description and the activation in here, and then save it. Um, that's basically how I would do it. Um, so basically, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you exactly how smooth Gran Turismo 2 really is. So I'm gonna just start it here. But basically, what I did was, is for example, if I wanted to edit a cheat, I would add a cheat, blah blah blah, and I would go to it, and it's really not hard to find the 60 FPS cheat for GT2. I would honestly recommend that if you do, you would get the 1.2 version because it works flawlessly. But you basically write the description of it, and then you would just put the code right there, and then save it, and then activate it by clicking or enabling it check mark. Um, so basically, I'm gonna go to machine test to show you guys exactly what I mean by smoothness, no blockiness, nothing. Um, because I think GT2 being one of my favorite racing games of all time, or one of my favorite PS1 racing games of all time, um, I think it's incredible to see that the game runs at 60 FPS, uh, just universally. So, as you can see, if you look at the environment, it's moving at 60 FPS, and then you look at the car, it's glossy, it's not blocky at all. It just feels like a totally different game. Obviously, if you played Gran Turismo 2, you would notice the difference between um, this version of the game where the codes and everything else and the settings are enabled versus the actual console version. So that's about it. Um, I hope that I explained enough in this particular video. If you like the content or you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Also, don't be afraid to join Discord or ask questions in the comment section. I would be glad to help you. I feel that it's very important to help out those. So, I'm Nick the Sand. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm signing off. Peace out.